Welcome to Religious Rejects, the podcast by Religious Rejects for Religious Rejects. I'm Christine.
And I'm Alycia. Welcome. Today we are talking about another S word. Salvation. Let's see how many times we can say S words in this whole episode.
That's right.
Woo!
Our new little game.
It is a new little game.
Yes. Okay, but seriously, Alycia,
Yeah.
if you were to die tonight, do you know where you would go?
I was going to ask you that question.
Because that is the question of my youth. Where am I going to go if I die tonight on my way home? Yes.
Yeah, this whole idea of salvation is a really big deal in Christianity, and it's central to our teachings and faith and everything like that. And it's got some different meanings based on what kind of Christian tradition you're a part of. But I think for many people today, it's really about, are you saved and where do you go when you die? Right?
Right.
That's what you grew up with.
Absolutely.
Right?
That is exactly what I grew up. I grew up with, and I guess grew up is a little bit, I started a little bit later. I did not get to enjoy youth group while I was of the age of youth group. I was a youth group leader, leading all these kids, to which I should probably do a whole podcast and say, I'm really sorry. Anyway, but in the evangelical mindset, you are not saved until you have said the sinner's prayer, which my knowledge is not in the Bible. It's more of a just, ask for forgiveness for your sins, and then you ask Jesus into your heart. Loosely based on John 3:16, and then you will be born again, kind of a thing.
Okay.
So that was what we had to do. So everything we did, especially me as a leader, everything we did had to kind of coalesce around that event. They would be called like altar calls.
Okay.
And anything, any event.
Every single event.
I was going to say any event. I mean, we're talking, basic church, youth group, summer camps, which I ran a lot of. Any type of retreat, lock-ins. Lock-ins are fun.
Oh.
That's when you literally get locked into, to keep us off the streets, because, the hoodlums that these children were in the suburbs. Anyway, so you'd get locked in.
Uh-huh.
But, I mean, it can go even as far. I have been a part of altar calls at weddings.
Oh.
At funerals.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah.
Not a wedding, but I have seen it at a funeral.
Yeah. It just continues. Funerals are a big one because, then you can really ask people, all right, brother so-and-so is now not with us. You now have a chance, before you end up like brother so-and-so, maybe you should ask Jesus into your heart.
That just seems really cruel.
Well, yeah, it's not, the heart is there. Again, I don't want to say that everyone's going into it with like negative intentions. The heart is good. They want everybody to get saved. It's just their method is just whacked.
Yeah, so the most important thing is that people accept Jesus into their heart in this model, right?
Yeah.
So would you call this the evangelical / Pentecostal model?
As far as pretty much, I know the Southern Baptists do it, evangelicals do it. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Okay.
Liturgicals, you guys don't do it, and you're much more liturgical background, correct?
Yeah. Lutherans, we didn't have this idea of that.
Yeah.
Well, and my question too is baptism a part of that or not? That moment of being saved and being born again.
That's always on the table.
Okay.
But
But on the menu of options or something.
But when you get saved, or at least from my experience, when people would get saved or there would be an altar call, and let's just take camp, for instance. I'm very familiar with camp.
Yeah.
Okay, so camp, you'd want to get these kids saved sometime during the week. You'd have them Monday through Saturday morning. You'd want to get them saved sometime of the week, but it really needed to be done by Friday because Friday was Holy Spirit night.
Oh.
Okay, and that baptism is the one you're looking for, the being baptized in the Holy Spirit.
Oh.
So from my background, your sinner's prayer usually coincided with the... I love getting to tell you these things because I have no idea that there are actually people that don't know what happens.
I mean, it's just wild to me. It's like on your to-do list. Like, I've got to get these kids saved by Friday night so they can be baptized in the Holy Spirit. Well, it's not about God's work in them. No. It's about you getting them to the point of being saved.
As the speaker, yeah, absolutely. And you could get a twofer on Friday. I mean, there is that last ditch altar call, which then turns right around into the let's now get you baptized in the Holy Spirit before he puts you on the bus back home. Yeah. It is.
I mean, it's a lot.
It is a lot. It's a lot of work. It's exhausting. It's a lot of work.
I can only imagine. That's like a lot of pressure.
And yeah, and but it also extends. So that was just me for camp. But then me as a pastor in a church or on staff at a church, you'd have these weekly staff meetings and you would be asked in certain, I can't say this for every church, but in these evangelical churches, there is usually a time where you are asked how many times did you maybe not lead somebody to the Lord, but did you present them with the option?
Okay.
Did you start the conversation? Did you have your little tracts, fun tracts?
Okay.
That's
spelled TRACT, by the way. It's a tract. It's a little brochure.
Yes.
Flyer.
Mm-hmm. It's a brochure or and this is the one that brings me trauma.
Oh no.
The $20 bill tracts.
Oh no, what's that?
So
$20 bill?
Yeah. So it would be folded in a way that it would look like it was money. They'd put it on the ground or unfortunately.
So that people would pick it up because they thought it was money?
Think it was money. And then they'd open it up and then the tract would say something about like, I have something more valuable than $20. And of course, not to that person who just thought they picked up $20 or to the waitress on Sunday, because this was a big thing. I have lots of friends from the service industry and that was a big thing. They hated working on Sundays because Christians would come in after church and they'd take this huge table of all of them together and then they would leave those $20 tracts as tips with no tip.
Oh no, really?
Yes.
Wow.
I got really angry. I didn't like those at all.
No.
Now the other tracts would just be, they're like little brochures with little graphic pictures. There would be these like two like mountains with nothing in between, and that would be the chasm between you and God.
Oh,
because of original sin.
Okay.
So God's not with you. Because of original sin, there's a chasm between you.
Got it.
And so you need to have something to bridge that chasm. Okay. And that's where Jesus' cross comes. And it gets laid down so you could walk across. These are all the pictures that I remember.
I'm sorry. I don't think it's like a ropes course or something like that.
Yeah.
Like a Ninja Warrior for Christians or something. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. I know that's a really
it was a real thing in my life. I was actually I was on a team, I'll have you know, that actually did like street evangelism. Okay. I was part of the drama team. I don't know if that surprises you. But I was part of the drama team.
That surprised me.
Yeah, you just keep reading that, Jack. So we would go into cities and we would do little dramatizations of apparently probably somebody going to hell. Oh, I always had to do the heaven one. I did get to go to heaven all the time. That was kind of fun. I described the streets of gold, which I know later we're going to talk about heaven and hell and what it may actually look like, but back in the day, that's how you would sell heaven to people, is that there are streets of gold, as if President Trump made heaven, but we won't go there. But yeah, so there's streets of gold, and there's gates, and it's all pearls, and you walk in and everybody's singing and happy and joyous, and don't you want to do this forever? Which I was like, no, not really. Like, is that it? Is that all we're gonna do? Like, just sing?
Not such a fan of singing, huh?
I mean, no, not really.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I understand. And then there's like, oh, well, you're gonna worship God. Okay, great. Is that it? And I think a lot of it is just your mind just can't even do that. But again, that is the big selling point. You can either walk around singing on streets of gold, with all of this stuff and worship God, or you can go to hell where there's, flames. And speaking of that, there was another fun thing we used to do. We'd watch a movie or watch a production called Heaven's Gates, Hell's Flames. And that was one of those scare things. So you'd get a bunch of kids and you'd lock them into a place, and then you'd show a movie. And of course, it would be a child or somebody of our age who, is just having a great time living life. But of course, like we talked about last time, they're sins. So they're drinking and they're making out with somebody, because, you can't show sex, but I guess making out was, that's the sin, apparently.
Okay.
And of course, women, scantily clad.
Okay.
Because, that was sinful. But so you show all these things indicating that this person's life was, total depravity. I know you love that phrase, total depravity. And then they get in a car accident on the way home. And they would then wake up in hell.
Got it.
Because that life could never produce somebody going to heaven. And they hadn't asked Jesus into their heart yet. So therefore, they are going to hell. So all of this is kind of the triggering, traumatic ways that I contributed to the young people. The youth of our nation back then. But also felt it. I mean, to be fair, I was just as scared. My mother was an atheist, or claimed to be. And she, there's that fear that she's going to die and not know God and end up in hell. And so I have to do all of these things to try to tell her that she's going to hell. And it's interesting because it's always about like talking to them and telling them and giving them a tract. And I remember doing that. And it's funny, my mother kept all my letters. And I found the one in which I am trying desperately. And I can feel the fear coming off 14-year-old Christine, like freaking out that my mom's going to die and she's not going to know God and blah, 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 blah. And I can only imagine what my mother. Anyway, but yeah, so I mean, that's the kind of fear that the salvation of the evangelical church kind of keeps people in. And we haven't even talked about how many times I've actually been saved.
Well, that's the other question I have for you too, because like when we've talked before, you've talked about being saved, but then there's this concept of backsliding, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so like you're then it's like your salvation has been revoked. Your being saved state has been revoked, and you have to rededicate your life to God.
Right. That is the understanding. And again, keep in mind the images that we had as evangelical youth, young people, were, drinking alcohol is a sin. Do you know what I mean? So things that may not have actually been sin were presented to us in a movie theater, Cinemax, IMAX kind of a thing, that these are sins.
Right.
Making out with a boy, all of these things. And then if you did those things, well, what if you get in a car accident? I mean, in the back of your mind, you're like, oh gosh, I could be like that kid. So you had to readdress your situation and maybe just make sure you were all still good. Okay. Because again, God apparently doesn't just love me I need to work for it. I need to stay in his good graces,
Got it.
which, it's troubling and it's exhausting.
I can only imagine. It sounds exhausting to me.
Yeah.
And just the pressure that you felt as someone working in the church,
Yeah.
got to get these kids saved by the Friday night, otherwise
That's right.
it's on my to-do list.
Because Friday night's coming. Or was it Thursday? I can't remember. One of the nights.
Right.
was
It's one of the
Holy
nights.
Spirit
It was
Yeah.
the night.
Yeah.
So it was precarious too. Like you could be saved, but then lose it
Yes.
through your actions.
Through your actions. Not your heart, but your actions.
Okay. Through your behavior, doing something that was sinful.
Yes.
Now, like if you yelled at your brother or something like that, would that be considered sinful enough to like revoke your standing, or was it like more serious? Like,
I think it'd be more like disobeying your parents. I don't know if siblings really fell into that.
Okay. Okay, got it.
And I wouldn't know. I was an only child,
Yeah,
so I
okay,
didn't
yeah,
have
okay,
any.
right.
But yes, if I disobeyed my parents, absolutely.
It's really about the afterlife, right? It's not salvation. Being saved isn't about anything in this life except you maintaining your salvation, right? And
Yes.
doing the right thing all the time.
Yes. The appearance of me being saved. And, and that extended to parents, if we
Oh.
want to go back to the parents. So if I am being disobedient as the quote head of household, my father would then be responsible for not training me up in the way that I should go. And therefore he can lose his position at church if I'm out here being crazy.
Wow.
So there's no allow it. I mean, it really is a scheme to just control behavior
Wow.
and people.
Mhm.
And then by extension, your organization. Because if you have these people on staff at your church, they have to control these kids. The kids have to walk in this control. They need to walk this line. And then everybody's happy. Then we are a thriving, successful church in the eyes of the world.
Wow.
Yeah, because it is about appearance.
And so how many times have you been saved?
I think I lost count. Yeah, I honestly, I
You're a very bad girl.
well, yes. I mean, I didn't mean to be. I was normal. I think that's the thing. I was normal. I was a kid,
Right.
I was pushing boundaries because that's what you do, and I was asking questions and I was pushing boundaries. And yeah, I would say at least 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't know. Definitely 4 or 5 times.
Okay.
And then baptized 3.
Okay.
Because, the first one was in a liturgical church, so I was just sprinkled. Then I got water baptized. And then
dunking?
that's the dunking.
Okay.
And then I felt like I had been coerced into that. So then I did it again later when I felt like it was my decision.
Okay.
So, yeah, we just keep doing stuff
Wow.
just to make sure it's really stuck.
Yeah.
Are we really sealed for the Lord? Am I really going to heaven? Because yes, that's what it's about. Where am I going?
It's just a lot, Christine. That's a lot. That is a lot. Woo.
Check out an explainer video by Religious Rejects. Out now on YouTube and Spotify.
I grew up Lutheran, and we have, it's like we use some of the same language, but it's like we ended up with very different ideas about things. It's so interesting to me, like how we're still Christian, although not all Christians claim the other Christians as Christians. I know that that is a thing.
Yeah.
Like, well, they're not real Christians or whatever. I know that happens. But this whole idea that your salvation is precarious and that it's really based on you continuing to be to behave in certain ways and act in certain ways in the world, or at least the appearance of it. It really does, as you said, it sounds really scary. I would imagine there'd be a lot of anxiety with the kids.
Yeah, I have no idea
lot of
where I got
fear.
all my anxiety. I have no idea. Yeah, no.
No.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really focused on the afterlife. I mean, a lot of times, and I'll say that is something that is also true in the Lutheran tradition I grew up in is that salvation is really focused on the afterlife. It's like
Right.
what happens after you die, heaven or hell. And it's a way of like controlling behavior of people here and now.
Which is interesting because, and we won't get into whether there's a heaven and a hell and all of that stuff, but even if there is, let's just say, the idea that everything that I do needs to be in preparation for something that I don't even know for sure is coming.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like none of us on this side know what's actually there.
Right.
So we're doing all this stuff, thus missing so many moments here.
Oh, yeah.
And so many relationships here.
Right.
And so many lessons that need to be learned here.
Right.
Because now we're just walking through going, hey, look, I got my ticket. I'm on the next flight out. If something happens to me, I'm good. So I'm just gonna, relax and judge. Let's be honest. Like now, if I'm good, then I just have to look out and see, well, who's not? Who needs help getting on the plane with me?
Yeah, and then it's the whole issue of then that you try to get them saved that they can get on the bus or the plane with you.
Right.
Yeah. So there's all these questions that come up with this idea of salvation for me. So, there's the question of, and I hear this a lot from people, so only Christians go to heaven. And so what happens about all the people who lived before Jesus or who never had the opportunity to learn about Jesus? So what happens to them? I guess, anybody who lived before Jesus's time on earth, even, all of them are going to hell. These are the questions that people always have.
We talked about this in the first episode too. It's like there's a holy waiting room. All those people got put in this waiting room until Jesus came and then died. And then when Jesus ascended, all of those people went with him. Now, again, how do you know all of them did? Do you know what I mean? Like, did they have to make a decision before they went up, or are they just golden? Because then that's not fair.
Well, exactly. That's my question. That was going to be my question.
That's not fair. I just thought of that right now. Like, they just get to go, so they got to live their life and enjoy it and then wait.
Wow.
If you think about that.
So this is a whole part of the theology that there's this waiting room for everybody who didn't get a chance to know about Jesus.
Right. Right.
Okay. And part of this theology is that Jesus died on the cross to save us from our sins. And we are so bad as human beings. We are so sinful.
Yes.
God can't stand us. It's like we're separated at the chasm that you're talking about, that we're so far from God that we have to have the cross fall down across between those two mountains and we walk across it. Yeah. And that just, and this is at the same time that our churches tell us that God loves us and Jesus loves us, but yet there's this terrible judgment.
Yeah, and blessed assurance, and I will never leave you or forsake you. Like there's so many contradicting, I love you unconditionally. Well, if you love me unconditionally, why are you holding all these sins against me?
Right.
Or are you? And that's the question. Is it just the church that told us that? And now I'm doing it to myself, holding myself accountable to all these quote unquote sins. And God's up there going, I never meant that. Ever.
Yeah. And it just doesn't really seem to hold up with this idea of God being a God of love.
Right.
Like this doesn't seem, this seems like a punitive, a mean God, very judgmental. I just have this image of somebody standing there wagging a finger at you. You know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely.
you need to walk the line. You need to make sure you're right with God. You gotta stay in your lane.
Stay in your lane. Absolutely. Yeah.
So that just seems like a lot of pressure and a lot of fear and anxiety and a lot of work to keep all that up too.
Right. But that's all we knew. We talked in preparation for this, and you were talking about, well, what about the other salvation ideas? Or what about the other ideas of salvation? And I'm like, what other ideas of salvation? What do you mean?
Right.
There's other ideas
Yeah.
of salvation. That blows my mind because I've never even considered that. And all the other things that I've considered, you really stopped me in my tracks because I was like, oh my God, I don't know.
Yeah.
So please help me. What are the other salvations?
Let me save you, Christine. Let me save
Thank God.
Let me save you from salvation. Oh my goodness. This fits right along with our last episode on sin, and a lot of this language that I talked about with sin last time really comes into play with salvation and with some different ways of understanding salvation. As I was preparing for this episode and looking at things, and I just said, what are, different Christian beliefs, denominational beliefs about salvation? And if you do that search too, you will get a whole lot of different options. And so it is interesting because it's such an important concept, and yet Christians have different ideas about it. But everyone believes that their one way of understanding it is the way.
Right. Yes.
And all the other Christians have it wrong.
Right.
And that all the other people have it wrong.
And I would say, I would add to that too. I'll bet anything, and I don't know because I didn't do the search, but I will bet money that the Bible supports or destroys all of them equally. Like you could find a verse for all of them, and you can find a verse against all of them.
Right.
So again, how do we know?
Yeah. And so how do we decide what is salvation? What does it mean for us? Because it is such a critical concept in the faith of Christianity. If you're going to claim Christian as your identity or part of your identity or part of your faith or whatever, it's like something to really struggle with. And I know that's been a question for me for a long time. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to worry about all those people who didn't know Jesus,
Yeah.
But then, what that does is it sets people up to become missionaries, and then there's all this spiritual and cultural violence that comes along with mission work around the world, as it has traditionally been done.
Yeah.
It's just there's so much damage and abuse and wounding of people in the name of saving them for Jesus,
Yeah. Yes.
So it's a very tricky thing. One of the things that really struck me almost immediately when I was looking at salvation in the Bible is that in the Bible, salvation is rarely about the afterlife.
Oh.
And for so many of us Christians today, salvation is all about the afterlife. It's about where you're going when you die, and making sure that you're right with God. If you look at the Hebrew and Greek words, 2/3 of the word salvation, when it shows up, 2/3 of the appearances of the word salvation or parts of, words like salvation, 2/3 of them show up in the Hebrew Bible. Which is really interesting because so often we as Christians think that salvation is only about Jesus.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So what is salvation about if 2/3 of the references to salvation are from the Hebrew Bible, which is long before Jesus came on earth?
Right.
So what does that mean? Most of the time in the New Testament, salvation is also about life here and now, not an afterlife, because the whole concept of afterlife really developed after the time when the Bible was written. The reference, and we're going to have an episode on heaven and hell, so we're not going to get into it, but the references to hell from Jesus and stuff, I mean, it's really interesting. There's references to people dying and something after that, but all of the imagery of hell and Satan and like the flames and all that kind of stuff, those came later, and it came from other influences. And so it's just a really interesting thing. So
Didn't they come primarily from Dante's?
a lot of them did.
Yeah.
Some of the artists
Yeah.
who can, people who I don't, you wonder about their psychological states.
That's fair.
But anyway, so as I talked about previously about sin, there's different ways of looking at salvation in the Bible. So salvation is liberation from bondage. God saved the Israelites from being enslaved in Egypt, and they came to the land of milk and honey.
Okay.
So they were liberated from bondage. So they were in bondage and they were liberated. Salvation is also a return from exile. And so twice the Israelites were conquered as a people by other empires, and they were sent into exile, by these empires. And God returned them to their homeland.
Okay.
And so that's another way of understanding God saved them from that exile. You know what I mean? And so that was also another form of salvation. Another one is this is a primary meaning of salvation in the Psalms: rescue from peril. Somebody's in trouble, like they're sick.
Yeah.
It's about being delivered from some sort of peril in this lifetime. Like I'm really sick, or an enemy's coming after me, but I'm rescued from something in this lifetime. And so it's not an afterlife thing, but it's like something that's happening to me right now, and God saves me from that. Those are definitely things from the Hebrew Bible way of looking at salvation. Then the other things that come, especially in the New Testament, are some of the language of being blind. Do you have eyes? There are those who have eyes to see but do not see, and ears who but do not hear, things like that. And that we can have eyesight but still not understand, because it's really about understanding what Jesus is talking about. Then there's also the language of being sick to healing, all the way to, being healed to being well again. And that is a form of salvation. And that's my favorite definition of salvation, is healing all the way to wholeness. And that does,
But not necessarily a physical healing.
well, it could be emotional, spiritual, physical healing. But whatever it is that is causing you pain, or is an illness in you, or, if it's depression or anxiety or addiction, that's, healing all the way to wholeness. When we return to God, our state is, God wants us to be whole, But again, that's not focused on an afterlife. That's focused on life here and now. Another one that's really interesting is from fear to trust. And how many times do we have those things, like a messenger from God, an angel will show up and, do not be afraid, fear not.
Right.
And Jesus said, do not fear, I will be with you always, and things like that. So it's this idea of moving from fear to trust, which is the opposite of, it sounds like, a lot of the messages you got about salvation, because that fear, well, they use the fear to move you to try to, to the whole place of being saved. So, what it's really about, a lot of the biblical understandings of salvation, it's about personal transformation or communal transformation, where it's the whole community, like all of the Israelites are saved from bondage in Egypt together. They're all brought back from exile together, so it's not just an individual experience, which is one of the things that it's one of the critiques, I think, of this idea of being saved from the evangelical tradition and some others, is that it's very individualistic, and it's like focused on me.
Yes.
And it's not focused on, well, what's happening in the community, and not looking at the larger issues affecting multiple people, or, a whole area of town, or a whole nationality, or something like that. The concept of being saved in this evangelical tradition is critiqued for being so individualistic that it's not able to address the larger issues of injustice that we see in the world.
Last time we talked a lot about sin, and we talked about the temptations, and I had mentioned those temptations, really seem to be very self-centered, for lack of a better thing. It was about, how can I get out of my discomfort? How can I be seen better, or, how can I persuade somebody, fix somebody? How can I get power? And so hearing you talk about that, this salvation seems to be very me-centered, man, that just kind of blew it up for me because then what Jesus says is when he talks about the commandments, he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then we talked last week that there's still us in the center. So it's not like we're excluded, but as we love God, we begin to love ourselves, which then helps us love others, kind of a thing. And it makes me wonder if this salvation is really about learning about who I am in God's eyes. The more time I spend with God, the more time I learn and love God, I begin to love myself. Carl Jung talks a lot about the true self and the false self.
Yeah.
And the true self was who God made me to be. And that person or that soul, that entity, whatever, is made in God's image. So that's the good one. And then you have this false self. And, obviously Carl Jung lived way before Facebook, but I would call it a Facebook self, your Instagram self.
Right.
What is it you want people to think about you? What do you want them to see about you? And why do you want them to see it? Because you want them to feel special. You want people to think that you're special.
Right.
And that you have it all together. All of that stuff. So it's interesting to me that it almost sounds to me, or at least what I'm hearing, as Carl Jung discovered, the closer you get to your true self, you get happier. Because the false self is, as we talked earlier, it's exhausting. Making sure everybody thinks that I'm okay, I look okay, I'm doing all the right things, I'm making sure you're doing all the right things, I'm making sure my kids are doing all the right things. That's a lot. Instead, I'm just spending time with God and learning about God and loving my true self and seeing how my true self is a lot like God. And then I have those characteristics and God really likes that. And then once you become whole, you then begin to love others. So to me, that's a great way to kind of see that salvation in my mind. And I definitely think I want to sit with that for a while.
Yeah.
Because what a beautiful way, what a beautiful kind of just way to sit and think about yourself as loved in order to love somebody else. Like here and now, I don't have to say this prayer. One of the other things that happens is even once you have gotten saved, do I pray every day? Do I read my Bible every day? Like you talked about a checklist. That is we have a checklist of all these things we needed to do. And in some cases, people check those checklists, as a pastor, on staff somewhere, staff meetings, how's everybody's reading? Is everybody reading the Bible? And it's like, wow, you had to prove that you were doing this.
Wow. Yeah.
Instead of just letting people, because here's the other side to this. Sometimes when you get stuck in the mud, like the prodigal kid, when you get stuck in the mud and the shit and all of the stuff that this world and this life throws at you, you may not read your Bible. You may not pray.
Yeah.
You may be pretty damn snarky. And I'm not even talking about perimenopause. Yes, look out, it's coming. But you know what I'm saying? Like there are times in your life where you're just not okay.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is the church will not be okay with you not being okay. But God's fine because God knows you're going to come closer.
Yeah.
I remember when my husband and I were at Bible college. My husband was a Bible college student. I was the wife of a Bible college student. And so therefore, I didn't mix as well. I mean, he knew all of his, I knew everybody. It was a very small place. So I knew people by sight and I could wave at them. And of course, you'd always wave and we'd all go to church together. At the Bible college, we all went to this same church. So we all knew each other, but my husband knew these people. He was with them every single day. He was in their classes. He knew all these professors. I ended up in our first year being there, our first year of marriage, I got pregnant and I had a miscarriage. And that was a really, really hard time.
Yeah.
I was very confused. I was very upset. There were lots of people telling me I must have done something wrong because of that whole mindset, you know, the whole, well, if this wouldn't have happened if I wasn't in sin, if I didn't have enough faith. So I'm beating myself up on top of everything else. And I'm going through all of this emotional up and down. And side note, both of my parents were not speaking to me at the time. That's a whole nother story. That's a whole nother season of podcast. But anyway, so I'm pretty much by myself. And I'm going through this. And of course, I had to do some medical procedures, you know, because I was hemorrhaging and all this fun stuff. And I wasn't going to church, obviously, you know, and I was sad. I was embarrassed. I felt a lot of shame and guilt.
Because it was somehow your fault.
Somehow it was
that
my
you'd
fault.
had the miscarriage.
Yes. So I finally, this is one of my favorite moments about myself, though. Hear me out. So I finally got to the place where I could like just go outside. Because again, we're on a Bible college campus. The apartments are right there. Everybody we know is right there. So all the people judging me, all the people for me, we're all together. And I had to go get mail. And so I go up to the mailboxes, which was in like a building, and I'm getting the mail. And there's people sitting in the area. And I swear to God, one of the professors there was literally talking about me as if I wasn't standing right there in the room. Like, oh, look, there's Christine. Oh, we haven't seen her in so long. I wonder if she's okay. And I'm like, I'm right here.
Wow.
You know? Now, this is like my first venture out, number one. Number two, I wasn't a fan of this professor. He's a bit of an ass, in my opinion. But I had never said that to him, obviously. You don't do that. You're a Christian. But I am so tired. I'm so exhausted. I have lost half of my weight in blood, you know?
Goodness. Yeah.
And I'm just now trying to get out.
Yeah. Well, it's traumatic.
And I have my back to them, and I can hear these people talking about me. And it's like, I wonder, and then he said something like, I wonder if everything's okay. I wonder if she's okay. Again, nobody walks up, stands up, walks over to me, takes my hand and goes, are you okay? Nothing. They're just talking about me.
Wow.
And I remember I slammed my little mailbox door, you know, the little,
Yep.
you know, and I turned around and I said, I had a miscarriage. Are you happy now? And I left.
Wow.
I was so angry. And now, most people would say, well, that wasn't very nice. You know, people are trying to be nice to you, blah, 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 blah. You know, but I got to go home and be angry at God, which I thought was amazing, and the situation. And I got so much closer with God through that, through not being perfect, through not being okay, for not having it all together than I ever did pretending that everything was fine. And so for me, it's like, I want the real. I want the true self over the false self.
Yeah.
You know, now, am I perfect? Obviously, no, I'm not, because I do have an Instagram. And yes, you know, now I don't like doing it, but yeah, you know, there was a time when I just showed people all the stuff I'm doing. Look at me, look at me, look at me. You know, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing or a good thing. I mean, unless you're doing cat videos, I mean, those are the best. Everybody should be doing cat videos. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. But you know what I mean? Like all those, like, you know, the thirst traps and whatever, which I obviously can't do. And, you know, but But it's like just that, like I have my whole life together kind of persona that we put out there. Yeah, I can't do that anymore. It's not good.
No. No. Well, and it's exhausting. It's
Yes.
exhausting maintaining that, for sure.
Streaming from the heart of the Rockies, this is Religious Rejects. Watch, listen, and join the discussion at religiousrejects.com.
There are some other theologies. There's liberation theology, womanist theology. There's queer theologians doing amazing work, postmodern theologians, process theology. There's a lot of different people looking at these things, and they're saying, another critique of this individual model of salvation is that, it's about saving each individual person. And it's like, I've said this before, it's like an escape hatch to heaven, that we're saved from this world. And it doesn't matter what we do in this world, because the real world is the afterlife,
Right.
And so it's led to the devastation of the environment and just our world being in the state that it's in, animals, so many animals and plants and, various species going extinct. The water levels are rising, storms are getting more extreme, the temperatures are rising, the extremes are getting more extreme. And it has really awful implications for the non-human world around us.
Right.
And our theology does not, hi Bailey.
Bailey?
That theology, that individualistic salvation theology, doesn't address any of that. And people say, well, what's the point of salvation if we're leaving this world behind us? And if we're contributing to the destruction of this world, which is God's creation. And how are we treating it? So it's
Exactly.
like,
Yeah.
so people are trying to wrestle with how do we understand salvation in a way that includes everything, all of God's creation, and not just a certain subset of human beings who get saved. There's a lot of baggage, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of pressure and fear and anxiety around this topic, and it's obviously something you've really wrestled with in your life. I know that for folks in the LGBTQ plus community, they're just automatically told, they're going to hell. What that does is it makes it's like, well, what's the point of doing anything then?
Right,
Like,
right.
if I'm going to hell just because I'm gay or trans or whatever,
And they can't change that.
and you can't change it, then what? Screw this. I'm just going to live my life and do whatever. And I mean, that is the epitome of spiritual abuse, in my opinion. You are only going to hell. Like, that's a terrible theology. Why would you ever want to be a part of that anyway?
Absolutely. I contend that the evangelical church needs a better PR department. If they would really just read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen,
Okay.
they may see that their whole mindset just doesn't work.
Okay.
And I say this as a, devotee of Jane Austen.
She's amazing.
Yes, I have made the pilgrimage to the house. I have touched the table in which Pride and Prejudice has been completed.
Oh,
Yeah.
so jealous.
And Persuasion,
Oh,
my favorite.
Persuasion. Persuasion is my favorite too.
But I always think, especially when we go back to this track system, this whole idea, we haven't even talked about the Romans Road.
Oh.
And this is how good evangelicals know to lead somebody to the Lord. You start by telling them, for the wages of sin is death. So let's just start off right off the bat. Hi, my name is Christine. You're a jerk. You're going to die because you're a jerk. But wait, there's more. Jesus still loves you, despite the fact that you're a jerk.
Okay.
Okay? And even though you deserve death, even though you should not even be in God's presence, he loves you anyway.
Oh, okay.
And he sent his son to die for you. And all you need to do is open the door, because Jesus stands at the door and knocks. I just totally Romans wrote it for you.
Oh,
Anyway,
thank you.
you're welcome. Yeah, because you needed that.
And that's a reference to the book of Romans, right?
No, well, it starts in Romans, yes.
Okay,
So,
okay.
so the Romans Road was our classic kind of formula to lead people. And generally those tracks would follow the Romans
Okay,
Road.
got it. Okay.
Now, because I am such a fan of Jane Austen, I remember reading this way past my street ministry days.
Okay.
Okay. And thinking, wow, this is a lot like the Romans Road and all of those Christian tracks. Because what happens is, and we can see how well this went, in Mr. Darcy's first proposal to Elizabeth Bennet,
In Pride and Prejudice.
in Pride and
Yay!
Prejudice, he says, "In vain I have struggled. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I love and admire you. In declaring myself thus, I am fully aware that I am going to be expressly against the wishes of my family, my friends, and I hardly need to add, my own better judgment."
Oh my goodness. He's really selling himself, right?
Well, yeah. So basically, Mr. Darcy is like, you are beneath me,
Mm-hmm.
but yet I'm in love with you.
I can't help myself, so please marry me.
So please take me out of my misery and become my wife.
Ugh.
And this is why people love Elizabeth Bennet.
Yeah.
Because she says, excuse me?
Yeah.
And she says, and I might wonder why, with so evident a desire to offend and insult me, that you choose to tell me that you like me against your will, against your reason, and even against your character. So I thought about this. I was like, that's literally what we're doing in these tracks. We're like, you are nothing. You are beneath me. You are this, you are that. But I, God, love you. Well, you still,
Despite all that.
despite all of that, I love you. Now, if you know your Pride and Prejudice, if you know your Jane Austen, you know that Darcy leaves stung, but also recognizes the error of his ways, because apparently he is so much more advanced than most Christians today. He realizes that maybe that wasn't the right way to woo somebody. And he starts to do things. He says nothing, he just does things for her. He is there. He just, quietly loving her where. And then at the moment she needs him, bam, he's going to do whatever he can to help her. And then he gets to come back later and say, so listen, my feelings haven't changed. I still would love to marry you. And by now she's like head over heels, because now she sees the man who he really is. So I contend if evangelicals would maybe let God just woo the people instead of thinking that they can take it upon themselves. But of course, then they wouldn't be called evangelicals.
Right. That's true.
But you know what I mean? Letting God do the work, because how many of us can really say, and I will say this, I don't want to say strong-armed, but I was definitely manipulated into a relationship with God initially. And so, but then once I got to know God, then I started to realize who God was and how God loved me. And that made all the difference in the world. Possibly one of the reasons I got saved 18 times, because, oh, okay, you've done that for me? Oh, okay, let's do this again. But I wonder if evangelicals would change their little mindset a little bit, get a better PR department, and just talk about that. No, God just loves you, because it's those moments, because you're right. Like, you already know, according to evangelicals, that God doesn't love you. So why am I going to waste my time? Do you know what I mean? And
Right.
that's heartbreaking, to think that people feel that way and not knowing that, oh, no, God adores you, adores you.
Yeah.
And there's really nothing you can do to change that.
Yeah.
God's always going to adore you. Whether you choose it or not, God's there.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I don't understand why evangelicals can't deal with that, but we have to deal with the fear, which
Right.
then makes it into just a transaction. And then there's no depth, there's no heart, There's no loving your neighbors. We see that today. My goodness.
Yeah.
You know, so many people that call themselves Christians that are telling all these people to get out of our country. You're allowed to stay. You're not allowed to stay. I mean, there's no love at all.
Yeah.
And it's like, where is this unconditional love and loving of your neighbors? I should probably get off my soapbox, but yes.
But I love that Pride and Prejudice tie-in.
Yeah.
That's really great. That's really great. It's true. It's really true.
Thanks for tuning in. Up next, will the rejects keep, rethink, or reject today's topic? Stay with us.
Today, as we're thinking about salvation, are we keeping something, rethinking, or rejecting? What are we doing? For me, I think I'm rejecting this idea of being saved, that definition of salvation, and that fear-based
Yeah.
religion
Yeah.
and the manipulation that at times can be part of it. It's not true of everybody, but it can be a manipulative way of getting people, getting your numbers for Christ or whatever. You know what I mean? So I think for me, I'm rejecting that understanding of salvation.
I definitely want to reject what I have known, but the joy and the excitement of rethinking is kind of where I'm at. And I remember Brian McLaren's book, Do I Stay Christian? And one of the chapters, and I remember this, one of the chapters is about that Christianity is actually a failed religion if you base it on transformation, because there is no transformation. That is a fail, you know? And for me, this idea of the transaction is so much more part and in front. Like, it's all about a transaction. I've done this for God, therefore I get to go to heaven. And now I have to do this for this person so they get to go to heaven, and then they will thank me. And it's just like this, and there's no love, and there's no what we talked about last time, that inner heart work that takes work.
Yeah.
And Carl Jung talks about that heart work to get to that true self, to really take a look at that. And that's what brings the transformation that also, in my opinion, brings the love for others. So the more that I am transformed into my true self of who God has made me, which is in her image, then I can love others.
Yeah.
The way she loves me.
Yeah.
Or the way that I receive the love. So for me, I don't even know if I know what salvation is. I don't know is there salvation? I don't even know now. Like, it's so out there. Like, I'm just like, can I just transform? I just want to keep transforming. And if that's my way of salvation, great. But now I'm like, I don't know. What am I being saved from? My false self? You know?
And what are you saved to? That's the question. What are we being saved from, and what are we being saved to? And is it just about us individually, or is there something, you can get so focused on this being saved and this salvation piece of it that you miss the person who's hungry right in front of you. You miss the ways that people are being oppressed, and the people who don't have a place to live, and all the things that they're confronting in their life. And you can spend so much of your time worrying about your afterlife, where you're going in your afterlife, that you totally miss the stuff that's right in front of you.
Absolutely. You're not present. You're not here in the moment. You're so worried about the future. And I do think, as you talked about, when it comes to the earth, we are all connected. Everything that God made is connected.
Absolutely.
Whether it's you and myself and these plants and the dogs, my cats, we're all connected. And that means the earth as well. And so if we follow more of this type of salvation, whether it's transformative, the more that we do that, the more that we connect with those around us, outside of us, kind of like what you're saying, and then the earth, and everything gets better.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything gets lifted up.
Yeah.
Okay, we've solved the world.
Yeah.
We're good.
Well, we are so glad that you joined us again for another episode of Religious Rejects, a podcast by Religious Rejects for Religious Rejects. And we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.
Bye. Bye-bye.